Hey there, thank you so much for getting my 3 steps to not screw up your kids if you were raised by a toxic parent. If you are anything like me, you don't want to pass on your baggage to your kids. What this PDF really is all about that you just got in your inbox is really helping you identify and be able to get in touch with the parts of yourself that might still have a lot of baggage, and that's okay. Okay, so we all have baggage. The important thing is to understand it and to recognize where it came from so that you can address it. You got a printout like this. The first part at the top I have here, first step is to identify how your parent impacted you. When we start to recognize how our emotionally immature, maybe narcissistic, self-absorbed parents have shown up or not shown up in our childhood home, we start to understand that we were never the problem to begin with. And that is the work that I help people unravel within themselves. So the first part I say is if your parent at all was unpredictable, you didn't know what to expect from them, you may have responded by learning to walk on eggshells and controlling your emotions and holding everything inside, which means that you were not allowed as a child to just be yourself, to be a kid, to make mistakes because you were in an environment that was dysfunctional and really made you feel as if you had to walk on eggshells in order to survive that environment. The second piece is if your parent was controlling, if they did a lot of things to manipulate you and control you in your childhood, you may have responded by becoming controlling of your environment and or your emotions, shutting your emotions down, holding your emotions inside, and then exploding because you can't hold it in anymore. Those are things that I struggled with so much for years, and I couldn't figure out, why am I responding this way? And it is because in my childhood home, I was not allowed to have my own emotions. When I had my own children, I didn't know how to express my emotions in a healthy way. And so I didn't. I held it all inside until my kids did something to piss me off enough, and then I exploded. And I hated that cycle. I felt like they were controlling this part of me that I had no control over myself. Also, if your parent was critical of you, you may have learned to be critical of yourself. Oftentimes, when we are raised in toxic family homes, we learn to be perfectionists. We learn to seek perfection, to have really high standards to the point where we can't ever meet them. And then we feel like failures when we don't, because we're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And also, if your parent was impossible to please, you may have the tendency to be a people pleaser. This is how generational trauma manifests in us. If you are a people pleaser, if you do your best to not rock the boat, stay with the status quo, seek that external validation from other people in order to feel good about yourself, that is a normal, natural response to a toxic family home. There's nothing wrong with you, but you have to understand where these tendencies come from in order to really address them appropriately and effectively. The last piece is if your narcissistic parent was emotionally immature, you may have the tendency to feel overly responsible for other people's actions and behavior. This is such a huge one because when we have emotionally immature parents, they tend to function down here. And what do we do as children? We learn to function up here. We learn to function at a higher level to take care of them because they're not able to take care of us. So there's a reversal in the child ends up taking care of the parent. And what this does is it stunts our growth emotionally as children. And then the next generation, what do? We're still functioning up here at this higher level, taking care of everybody and feeling responsible for everybody's emotions and things that we can't control. And then we tend to pass that on to our kids. And so our kids end up not having to be responsible for themselves because we're responsible for everything. So this is how this kind of over-functioning, under-functioning pattern continues to the next generation. The second step is this pink part in the middle. And in this pink part, I talk about decoding your dysfunctional parenting. In order to really understand how to not screw up your kids, you have to understand that a dysfunction is living inside of you. Doesn't mean that you can't heal. It doesn't mean you're broken at all. Actually, it just means that you learned some coping traits that aren't serving you. But you have to know what the dysfunction looks like and how it's manifesting in your parenting with your kids. Because until we realize how it's actually manifesting with our kids, we can't address it. We can't fix it. So the second step is really important. If you are emotionally reactive with your kids, you may stuff your emotions and hold them inside until you blow up, like I was just describing, because you never learned how to process them as a child. Being emotionally reactive, again, is just a symptom of dysfunction. Dysfunction is living, alive and well inside of you. So if your kids are doing things to piss you off, if their behavior is attached to your ego, and what I mean by that is that you are triggered by their behavior where you are really reactive. And if they are behaving well, you're on a high. You are feeling like a kick-ass parent. You're doing good. You're like, yeah, I'm rocking it as a parent. And then when they start to dip and start to become defiant, rebellious, when they're not meeting your expectations, when they're talking back, then all of a sudden your self-esteem and confidence plummets and you start beating yourself up and feeling like a horrible parent. That is happening to you. It is a natural response to ego-driven parenting, which is what you inherited from your parent. This is all fixable. This is what I do. I teach people how to fix this stuff, how to address it within themselves so that you are not controlled by your child's behavior. That is a horrible place to be. And I used to live on that roller coaster daily, and it was horrible. If you are controlling of your child's behavior, and if you use threats, bribes, any kind of manipulation to control your child's behavior, this is just another way in which dysfunction is showing up for you, because that's what you learned from your parent. Being critical. Again, this is if your parent was critical of you, you learn to be critical of yourself, and you're possibly being critical of your own children and looking at what they're doing wrong instead of what they're doing right. I was doing all of these things. I was miserable for a very long time in my parenting. I was very critical of my kids. I was very critical of myself. And it wasn't until I started understanding my own mindset and how negative I was that I started being able to address, oh my gosh, I am my own worst enemy. I'm beating myself up here. I'm feeling like a horrible parent because my child isn't obeying me or listening to me, or they're disrespecting me. And yet then I would be very critical of my kids. It's this really vicious cycle, expecting your kids to please you. If you are a people pleaser, you likely naturally want your children to please you. You might be doing things unconsciously to get your kids to obey you and do what you want them to do and to please you. You might be unintentionally shaming them when they don't, just again as a natural response to get them to please you, because that's what you learned from your parent. This is just perpetuating a cycle of people pleasing. It's getting your child accustomed to seeking external validation so they can feel good about themselves. If you want to break this cycle, work with me. This is what I do. I teach parents how to change that cycle and how to rewire that cycle so that your child is being true to themselves and isn't seeking external validation to feel good about themselves. But what that means is if you want to teach your children to do that, you have to be doing that for yourself, which means you have to break this cycle within you. And you have to stop seeking their approval and their validation to make yourself feel like a good parent. See how tricky this is? It feeds into itself. It's hard work, but you can do it. And this is why I teach what I teach. It's because it's doable. You can absolutely do this. You can absolutely break this cycle, but you have to have a plan. And I have a plan. I have a plan in place. This is what I do. And I'm passionate about it, obviously. I could be talking about this stuff all day long, every day. The fifth piece is rescuing and fixing. If you were taught and trained as a child to rescue and fix things for your parent, that is likely what you were doing for your child. And you have to stop doing that, because what that ends up doing is it sends a message to your child that you aren't capable. You're not capable of doing this for yourself, so I'm going to do it for you. And also, I don't believe in you. I don't believe that you are strong enough and that you are capable enough to do this for yourself. It really kind of like undermines the very messages we want to be sending, because I'm sure you want to be sending the message that you are capable, you can do this, I do believe in you. And yet when we rescue our kids, when we enable them, when we do things for them that they are capable of doing for themselves, we are cutting them down and not building up their self-esteem and their confidence. There are things that you can be doing that where you can actually be building up their confidence. And that means that you have to start trusting them. And in order to trust them, you have to trust yourself. Okay, so that wraps up decoding your dysfunctional parenting. Now, the third step in here is the most important piece of the whole shebang. We have to break the cycle. It's this green part right here. We have to break this cycle and create healthy patterns. I have what I call the cycle breaker blueprint, which I will tell you about in a moment. But breaking the cycle and creating healthy patterns is all about intentionally doing things differently and creating new habits. That's all we're doing, okay? And in order to do that, we have to learn specific skills. Without the skills, you will not be able to break these patterns because the patterns are too strong. So the first one is expressing your emotions in a healthy way. If you want to break this cycle and if you want to create a new legacy for your family, you have to learn how to identify and express your emotions in a healthy way. Otherwise, your children are only going to be learning how to stuff their emotions and then get triggered and then do the downward spiral that you're doing. So that's the first step. The first thing you can do is learn how to identify and express your emotions in a healthy way. The second step is to trust yourself. If you were raised in a narcissistic family system, you likely do not trust yourself. You were trained to not trust yourself. You were trained to not trust your emotions, your experience, your feelings, your opinions. You were in an environment that undermined your sense of self. And when we're raised in that environment, we learn to not trust ourselves and we learn to trust everybody else around us. In order to break that cycle, you really have to start trusting yourself. You really have to start giving yourself the benefit of the doubt, and you have to start trusting your child too, which means to let them make mistakes, let them screw up, because that is how children learn. They don't learn by having us coddle them and rescue them so that they never fall. They learn by falling and learning to get back up. Trust yourself, allow yourself to make mistakes, and know that you're okay, because your value is not based on that external validation. The third piece here is to focus on the positives. Start to turn that inner critic's voice around. Start to transform that inner critic's voice and start to pay attention to and look for all of the things you're doing right, all of the things you were successful at. You can start small, baby steps. The more you pay attention to the positives, the easier it's going to be to start amplifying that story. The more you amplify that, especially for your child, and you start thanking them for emptying the dishwasher, looking at all of the positives that they did throughout their day and thank them, show gratitude, show appreciation, that is going to help them feel capable. And the more you pay attention to that, it will be amplified. Whatever we focus on amplifies. If we're focusing on the negative, we're going to see more negative. If you focus on the positive, your child is going to all of a sudden feel like, oh, mom and dad really appreciated it when I did XYZ. They're going to be more likely to do XYZ. This is really all about shifting that mindset from negative to positive. It's crucial in order to break this cycle. The fourth piece here is to not take their behavior personally and to really detach your ego. You have to detach your ego. If you want to have power over your reactions and have any hope in changing and breaking this cycle, you have to detach your ego. And what this really means is that your sense of self, that your self-esteem, confidence as a parent is not reliant on what your child does. Now, that may sound completely bonkers, but I will tell you, I used to be, like I said, on this roller coaster. I felt completely powerless to this dynamic. And I was on this roller coaster just going along. Now, today, because of all the work that I've done and all of the reading and understanding and getting underneath a child's behavior and really understanding where a child's behavior comes from, I'm able to meet their need to feel seen and heard in a radical way and set boundaries and follow through without my ego getting involved, which is extremely freeing, because now when they do behave well or they don't behave well, I'm not going like this. I'm able to stay even keel and know that my sense of self, my confidence as a parent, is not based on what they do or don't do. It is extremely freeing. You have to stop taking their behavior personally. It's not personal. They are having their own experience. They are trying to express their own emotions, and they are trying to find themselves and their own autonomy outside of you. And sometimes that comes through rebellion. That is what I do. I help teach parents how to break these cycles. The fifth piece, the last piece here, is so big and it's scary, and I totally get it, but it is so important. If you want to break this cycle, you have to allow your children to fail. You have to stop bailing them out. You have to stop enabling them and taking care of everything for them. You have to pull back and stop coddling them. It means that you stop telling them what to do all the time. You start asking them questions. You start saying, hey, what is it you need to take to school today? You start putting them in the driver's seat. You start having them plan out their homework sessions instead of go do your homework. It's time to do your homework. Take care of your homework. It's, how are you going to get your homework done today? What's your plan? You put them in the driver's seat. And what this does is this builds into their sense of self. This builds into their capability that, oh, mom and dad believe in me. Mom and dad think I'm capable of figuring this out. And when you have, an expectation that they can actually meet, not a ridiculous expectation of perfection, but when you have an expectation that's fair and rational, that's something that they can actually meet and they meet it, that is so incredibly gratifying for them. And it builds into their sense of self. When you build into your child's sense of self, that comes back tenfold in so many different ways. That builds their confidence, that helps them feel like they do not have to do things in order to earn love, that they can stand on their own 2 feet and take a stand for what they believe in, even if other people don't like it. So when you think about like the long-term ramifications of, enabling your child or rescuing your child, you're just constantly feeding into this story for them that I don't think you're capable. You don't have the ability to set boundaries and follow through with them. And that's not the message we want to be giving to our kids, but that's oftentimes just the side effect of being raised in a toxic environment. I know that this was a lot of information, but I want you to really understand it is possible to not screw up your kids. It is possible to break this cycle. I hope that this gives you the clarity that you need to understand how to break this cycle. And this is what I do. All of these pieces are a part of my bigger program where I take you step by step through, and we focus on how to set boundaries with your narcissistic parent. What are your trauma traits? How is your trauma from your narcissistic parent showing up in your life today? We go through step by step, and I take you through each of these areas. And so if you would love to set up a free strategy session with me, please do so. I am so passionate about this work, and I am so passionate about helping you break this cycle just like I have in my own family. I look forward to meeting you, and I hope that all of these tools are helping you become the badass that you were born to be. I will talk to you later. Bye.